Hey, Paul.
Hey, Fab, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Yourself?
Good.
Cool.
Yep.
So today,
I'm doing great.
other than beating yourself up,
Other than beating myself up, literally, I'm doing great.
nice, awesome. What I want to say, yeah. So today, let's jump right into it. Reporting, data, metrics. What I'd like to talk about, what sales and marketing managers, what kind of data they should be following on a regular basis. So let's start with you. What should sales managers? What kind of reports should sales managers have? What kind of data should be looking at? Should they be looking at data?
Yes, they should.
Okay, that was a great conversation.
First thing is, it's a huge question, right? So let's break it down. First thing is sales managers should be requiring reports or data from their salespeople for one reason, to sort of follow and see what's going on and be able to help them move forward and move opportunities forward and sort of get a global view of what's going on and how to strategize to go forward. That's the first thing.
Right.
Well, sales managers often also report to higher end leadership, so they need data to report back to their leaders. So reports serve two purposes, right? So the manager acquires that information from the salespeople to see what's going on and be able to do a diagnosis to be able to then answer back up to their leadership to tell them what's going on. So let's assume for a second that you're not working in this huge multi-layered company. Let's assume for a second that you're a sales manager / owner.
Right.
So the information that you should be requesting is information that's going to help you forecast what you need to do in operations, moving forward, in supply. So if your sales are, I'm going to really simplify it. If the sales are doing super well, we need to manufacture some more. And if we can't supply that manufacture well, we're going to need to outsource. So essentially, the report helps you guide your business where you're going. Now, data is also really important to help your salespeople realize how they're doing in the whole universe of their company.
Yeah.
So to help them move forward and help them achieve their objectives, their motives, where they're going. So data is super important. Data alone doesn't do much.
Yeah.
But if you're interpreting the data properly, if you're using it properly, it has a bazillion uses. Now, you know what your margin is. It's fun to know, what kind of products you're selling. It really helps you guide the direction of the company. So there's a ton of great, valuable information, and I think data should also be shared. And what you're doing with that information is really important, and that should be shared with your team so that they understand the importance of that data and how it's going to help the company move forward, and obviously in the end help them move forward.
Right. And so would you say that there's, like if you were to say, what would be like the top, and maybe obviously there's probably more than one top one, but like if you're a sales manager, by default, at least be checking this on a daily basis or regular basis, like what would be the number one big report or, like data to follow?
In my opinion, if you're a sales manager, if your goal ultimately is to ensure that your team is motivated and moving forward and doing everything that it can to achieve the goals that you're looking for, I think the most important report is not so much, and this might be a little controversial, it's not so much the results, but the actions that people are taking. And why do I say that? Because if you know the actions that people are doing, the results are easy to see. It's very obvious, that's the easiest part.
Right.
To understand if the actions that you're taking will lead to results, and to figure out how much of the results you actually control and try to control the things that you do. So to me, the most important report is an activity report.
Right.
I mean, calls.
The activity, you mean like the salespeople's activity?
Correct.
Right. Yeah. Like calls and emails and stuff like that.
Calls, emails, and then to find out and dig down into figuring out what are you doing during those calls and emails. I'll give you a very basic example.
Yeah.
Rep number one is doing 2 calls a day and selling everything. Rep number two is making 10 calls a day and selling nothing.
Right.
Then you can figure out, you know what they sell. You don't even need a report for that. That comes in. Yes, it's there. Yes, you get reports, but mostly it's very obvious in most companies to see what's going on. I have worked for some companies, though, that I say that, and I have seen some companies where it's hard to know the sales results. So yeah. So let's assume that's simple for a second, and of course that's important. But the activity report is probably the most important as a sales manager.
Mm-hmm.
Your job is to coach them and motivate them and help them, achieve their results and get your team to where they want to get to, where you want them to get to.
Yeah. Interesting. So I think in marketing, I mean, I like how you presented kind of there's two functions to data, kind of managing up and managing down in a way. And so marketing, you'll have obviously something very similar. I think you're probably going to present different data. So I think on the managing up, so showing like, your VPs and or the executive suite or whatever. And we're talking about B2B here, obviously. I think you want to probably break down and I think we talked about this like a few weeks ago, but I think marketers need to tie their results back to at least one core revenue related metric, whether that's qualified leads or whatever you decide with sales makes sense and that everybody can agree on, because that's the other variable. And so I think you need to work on, like, present that on a regular basis. And I think also some sort of attribution report, like, right, all of your different marketing initiatives, how are they all tying back to revenue, right? So I think that you should be able to do on a regular basis. But I think otherwise also you'll probably want to report back on lead levels, like how many leads are we generating or qualified leads and so on and so forth. So that's managing up. I think managing down, you just need to be able to drill down on, honestly, unfortunately, if you're doing a lot of stuff, all the marketing activity you're doing, right? So you want to be drilling down on your email performance and your landing page performance and your social and so on and so on and so on and so forth, right? So that you can then work with the team to identify early on where things aren't working. But I think that top level one is probably the most important, because if you can see that, we've agreed that we would generate, or we would, attract X number of qualified leads a week or a month, and you realize that you're off, right away that, okay, yes, we'll dig down into more specifics, I guess, to figure out why we're not doing that. But that should be kind of the North Star.
Okay. And do you think in marketing, it's a leading question, do you think in marketing that the activity is also important in the sense that, in a way, marketing, you control even less the outcome. So don't activities, let me put it this way, don't activities matter even more than results in a way? Like, is that maybe a mistake that we make often with marketers, or do we don't give a crap about activities and we really look at results?
I think the activity is an interesting question in marketing, because I've worked with a lot of executives or CFOs or whatnot, and they're like, man, the marketing team is always so busy, but we're not generating the results. I think that's a big issue, and I think when the marketing team tends to be very busy and you're not able to see the results, it's probably that the activity is not tied back to something concrete, right? So the copywriter has their own metrics that they feel are important, and the lead generation team has their own, and the events person has their own, and everybody's super busy because they're all pulling the cart in different ways, right? And so I think the activity level is important, but not in the same way that sales is, because if I spend 15 hours writing an ebook, if I'm a copywriter, and if my copywriter is spending 15 hours writing an ebook, that's not necessarily going to guarantee the quality of it or whatnot, right?
No, for sure. It's you have to take that?
No, it's okay.
It's interesting because I think we're saying something very similar, in that reports. I think a lot of people forget, like, they just ask for reports, right? I mean, I remember working in one company where it was just, the upper management was just addicted to reports that they just used to ask all the time, and it got to a point where the team we were working with was spending more time doing reports than they were out selling. So, some people who are at that level do get reportitis because, oh, look, we get this metric and that metric, and you try to normalize everything. But you have to, I think if you can, one thing that's really important about reports is you should automate as much of the reports as possible. So with today's CRMs and marketing tools, I'm sure, and project management tools, there's probably more and more that can be automated so that you're retracting or getting data from someone's regular workday, so that it's not like 10 years ago where you had to spend 5 hours a week printing your reports. If you're just putting it in your project management software or in your CRM software, a lot of it is just connects up with ERP, connects up with sales, and then the reports are just generated. Now, what's important, and that's great. What's important is to properly analyze that data and that's where the human being comes in, right? We haven't AI'd that yet, but where the human being comes in and decides how to synthesize that data and use it best. And that's, it comes down to the core element of what are you going to do with this data? But the actual report itself, the reporting, the data accumulation means nothing if it's not interpreted and used properly. So, that's
right. Exactly. And I've lived that, right? Where we would, we had back when I was working like for a company full time, we had an executive who wanted these like insanely complex reports, and it would take the team like literally a week to compile that. So they'd lose a week every month trying to compile this report. And I'm just like, what's the value in that ultimately, right? And so I think that's why I was saying, marketing wise, at least, it's keep it simple, right? Like, did you agree that marketing was in charge of qualified leads because X number of qualified leads are going to generate X number of sales? Then let's focus on that. And then marketers can worry about, why are we generating? Why are we not generating? What's working? What's not working? I think as an executive, you need to worry about what's the revenue that we're driving? Is marketing doing what they need to do? Great. Are we on track? Yes. Are we not on track? No. I'm simplifying. Obviously, some executives will be more interested than others, and want to drill down a bit more. But you're right. It has to be automated, and you can't spend hours putting everything together.
If it's interesting because I think it really boils down to, I don't know if you remember the film Moneyball. Have you seen that film?
Yes.
So, there's a brilliant analyst who accumulates a ton of data and does great things with it, right? I think every analyst and every company sort of has the dream of being the Moneyball guy, right? Because if you can retract or you not retract, but if you can extract, I was looking for the word, if you can extract valuable information from reports, then they have great value. So, but if your report generation in a sales environment or a marketing environment slows down your team by 30%, and then you're presenting an option that brings in an extra 1%, well, you're sort of defeating the purpose. So you need to, I think, if you can automate as much as possible, and have analysts explain what they're trying to do, it can generate motivation, right? So if, for example, let's say a manager says, hey team, I'm going to ask you for this extra report, whether it's marketing or sales. And they go, oh, but they say, look, the reason we're doing this is we think that it can do this, that. And in the end, it's going to help us do this, that. That's going to help you guys do this. Oh, okay. Now I get it. Right.
Yeah.
But if it's just some other report that drives you nowhere, that just drives you berserk, well, then I think we're really saying the same thing. And I think I'm older than you, but I think you're still old enough to have lived through that era where a lot of things were not automated.
Yeah.
In the last, I'd say even the last 5 years, a ton of stuff's been automated, and it's wonderful. It's just great. And if you can synthesize and extract valuable data from that without putting 2 hours of effort into something that'll save you 5 minutes, then you're ahead of the game. This being said, I think a sales manager and a marketing manager should, more importantly, really learn to read and understand their So if they're a sales manager in a large corporation and they don't have a lot of decision-making power, but they're just there to motivate their team, well, what do those reports should be there? It's okay. How can I coach my team? How can I help them move forward, right? If it's really more of a sales/leadership position, which is often the case, as I said earlier, in smaller companies, and same thing in marketing, well, then how does that benefit the company? Again, how does that benefit the team that you'll be pitching it to?
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think it's, you're right. We're kind of saying the same thing in our respective groups or expertise, but ultimately you need data to be able to drive your results and your decision making and things like that. But there is the risk of wanting too much data and wanting to measure absolutely every detail and things like that. And if you can tie it back to something concrete, like, well, we need to know how often the rep goes to the bathroom because X, Y, Z. Well, if you can't tie it back to something specific, it's probably not worth measuring.
And let's be careful here, right? We need data, of course, to move forward, but a lot of data is just there and readily accessible, right? So in a small sales organization, you don't need to have a bazillion reports to tell you that sales are going well or not going well, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful there. I think what happens, and this, you and I have both worked in large corporations, you get sort of that middle management that, and I hate to say this, it's trying to justify their existence. So they tend to have reportitis, or tended. I'm talking tended to have reportitis. So, you reports are tied into many things and can be indicative of other major failings rather than just the fact that some person is asking for more of them. So reporting is very important, and I think you should establish before you ask for any report. You should ask the reportee. You should tell the reportee why we're asking for this information.
Yeah,
it's going to benefit them, because it's going to be very hard for you to convince any reportee of doing the report if they don't see a value to themselves. If you're asking a salesperson to collect a bunch of data because some top-end executive wants to try to sell the company, and selling the company to them means nothing, they're not going to take it seriously. And you know what? Maybe they shouldn't, because it doesn't really benefit them.
Yeah. And so I have a question for you, because, you're right. In marketing, a lot of the data is automated. Let's say, like your email open rates. And so if you're realizing that you're not achieving your targets, it's relatively easy, if your system is relatively clean, to drill down and see what's working and what's not working. And it's easy to show the person, your copywriter, your email person or whatnot, why we need to collect the data. I mean, it's being collected anyway. And it's easy to say, well, to your copywriter, well, we need to be better at organic, like search, because, our search results are down. But in a situation where you're with salespeople, where, yes, increasingly the data is increasingly automated, right? The number of calls they make, how long they're on the call for, and so on and so forth. But sometimes I feel some of the data we're collecting in sales, like you were talking about activity reports, feels like we're doing it because we want to know how to set the target for the salesperson, right? So I'm like, we need to track how many calls you're making, because that's going to help us set benchmarks. But I could see how some salespeople be like, well, let me do doesn't matter how many calls I make. It's the result that matters at the end of it. I feel there's more of a contention in sales.
Well, now we're jumping into, we've talked about this in the past, and now it's how you manage your team. It's how you coach your team, right? So if you tell your team member, I want to know how many calls you make, because I want to be able to calculate your closing ratio so that I can help you, make your closing ratio smaller, right?
Yeah.
I want to make it so that when you're making 10 calls, you get one sale, rather than when you're making 20 calls, you're getting one sale.
Yeah.
When we're going to try to work. But first we have to analyze the data, and then we'll look at what you're doing.
Yeah.
We want to get an average to help you guys also situate yourselves. So there's always a way. Look, accountability and data and data collection on individuals is always going to be something that you have to position and finesse properly. Now, if you're an honest, I'm gonna shoot out of this for a second, but it's important. I'm gonna do a little parentheses. If you have a good culture, if you have a good, your reps know, or your salespeople, or your marketing employees know that your mission and your vision is good and they agree with it, and that you have a good sales culture, it's going to be a lot easier for you to explain to your employees that or your salesperson that you're actually checking how many calls they do to help them with their closing ratio. If you have a crappy sales culture where you're firing people continuously and they're always at risk, then they're going to be fearful, and hopefully so. So if you have a culture of fear, it's going to instill fear. If you have a culture of growth, they're going to say, oh, great, I'm going to know my closing ratio and it's going to work. And more you've got, I've only got the French word in mind, pleine conscience. You've got more and more, I can't think of the word. We're using more and more empathy in the company. You're using a style of management that brings people to their full motivation, that makes them want to be happy. They're not just numbers in a game. So now when you're asking them these numbers and you're putting these things forward, there's probably a lot more likeliness that they're going to want to come forward.
Yeah.
I think there's a big shift in most sales. I've seen a huge shift in the last 10 years in what sales leaders and sales managers believe in how they motivate people. Hence, when you're collecting data, it's a lot easier to show to your employee, well, this data is going to help me help you.
Yeah. And I think, and you said something really interesting, because in marketing, like it's almost like, well, yeah, we're going to track our open rates because, a better open rate is always better, right? More people are reading my messages, or my click-through rates, increasing your click-through rate is better because more people click through, the more people convert. And so it's almost not all of it, but a lot of the data is intuitive and obviously better is better, right? But you said something really interesting about, we were talking about the call numbers, right? And I feel like a lot of executives, when we're talking to sales or salespeople, are like, well, we can track number of calls, so we're going to track the number of calls, so we need to make sure that you're entering it properly. But it's never really explained, other than we can do it, so let's do it. It's never, I'll venture out, and I might be wrong, I'll venture out and say a lot of executives don't really know why they're measuring it, other than they can, and maybe they're stopping at the second level, which is like, well, if we know that it takes 100 calls to make one sale, we can benchmark, as opposed to saying, okay, now that we know that it takes 100 calls to make one sale, how can we make that 50 calls or 75 calls or whatever?
That's the easy way out. By the way, the word I was looking for is mindfulness. So many more companies are being mindful of how they treat their employees, how they treat their clients, how they treat people that they deal with, and that brings a better way of doing business.
Yeah.
So you're right, Fab. A lot of people, the result becomes the metric, and that's dangerous, because if your result is the metric, so if say I want you to do 15 calls today, and you're just looking at that data, well, that just becomes the bad usage of data. That just becomes the improper application to your data. That's a whole other subject.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people have similar data, and the people that know how to properly, two things, use the data, that's very important, and two, explain to the people they're asking the data collection from, will have much better success. And again, I use a company who recently has decided to put in a new CRM, and the employees are all up in arms and whatnot. And what we're doing there with my client is we're saying, listen, this CRM is going to help you get better at what you do. It's going to be a tool to help you ask the right questions and move along your sales process, so you don't forget to sell value. So you don't forget to ask your questions. So you don't forget to find out what motivates your client. So you don't forget to find out all the things that are important to figure out how you can best close that business so that your closing ratio gets better.
Yeah.
That's how you present. It's got to be packaged. If you're reporting and your data collection is packaged with an explanation that helps your employee or subordinate, for lack of a better word, colleague, understand what it is that you're trying to do, it helps a lot. It's like use the whole, use the parent example. Your kid comes home from school, and the data you're getting is the report card.
Yeah.
The kid doesn't want to hand you the report card if every time you don't see an A, you whack him over the head with a slap. Like, think of the 50s. Think of our parents when they'd come home and our grandparents would whack them across the back of the head because they didn't get a good report card. Whereas now, if your kid comes home and you're a little bit more genteel and a little nicer and you're a little more mindful, it's like, oh, you didn't do so well. What do you think happened? Well, then, oh, I had a hard time with this and that, and you're talking, and not a 5-year-old, but maybe your kid when they're in CEGEP or in university. CEGEP's a thing we have here, college. Yeah. So there's data is important, but how you synthesize it and how you ask the people who are giving you the data is even more important. Yeah, because that's the true, to know how many calls people are doing and whatnot. And I've seen companies do some crazy stuff based on data, not looking at how it would affect the company. One of those companies has cut down half of their effective properties because they didn't manage properly, because they had some nut bar at a high level, looking at data and not finding out how this data really works. Yeah. And it's like saying, oh, people in Quebec are more likely to get coronavirus because they don't wear, is it because they don't wear masks? There's a whole bunch of stuff around that. The whole coronavirus. Remember, that's actually a perfect example. Remember at first, people in Quebec because the spring break was actually 1 week earlier, so a bunch of people went elsewhere, so there was a much higher wave. So you need to understand. So when you're collecting that data and you're explaining it to the people, it's very important to do that so they don't just feel looked at and aimed at and blamed for something that's out of their control, but rather, how can we use this to the advantage of the population to make them do something better, right? Yeah. And I think, as we wrap things up, I think I like this. Are you telling me I talk too much, Fab? What? Are you trying to tell me I talk too much? No, it's already been a good 20, 25 minutes. No, I just went on a rant there. Sorry. No, but it was good because I think, yes, we talked about, we went concrete into the sales and marketing reports that we need, like activity reports and revenue reports and whatnot. But I think what's important when you're thinking about your new year and planning and what are you going to be measuring and tracking, it's important, again, we always go back to the Simon Sinek thing, right? Which is start with why. Why do we want to, track our email open rate or our sales rep call rates, right? Why do we want to do that? Well, because we want to see if we're getting the best results. Well, why? And then you move back and do the why. Well, ultimately, we need the revenue to grow or whatnot. And I think that's where a lot of the challenges with a lot of these reports is that we're not spending the time figuring out why we need this and what the data actually means at the end of the day. It's a perfect wrap up. It's exactly that. And it's sort of like there's a bazillion sales tools out there. There's a bazillion communication. We were just talking about Slack last week, and there's a bunch of things out there. They're all great tools, but if you're not using them properly, it doesn't really end up helping you in any way. So you need to think, what are my objectives first? What am I trying to achieve with these reports? And what will it give me eventually, right? So it's interesting. So no, it's good conversation. Cool. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Fab. Talk to you soon.